You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. In recent years, the topic of artificial intelligence, or AI, has come to dominate media headlines. Everyone is talking about how AI is going to fundamentally change almost every aspect of our lives, and that includes our intimate lives. So in today's show, we're going to explore the impact that AI is already having on the world of dating and relationships. Some of the topics we're going to explore include how AI can help us to improve our dating odds, how many people are already using AI to make romantic connections, why men seem to be relying on AI a lot more than women for dating, as well as whether AI is going to make our dating lives better or if it's going to ruin everything. We'll also dive into the topic of AI companions and discuss why some people are actually choosing AI over human partners. I am joined today by Ellen Kaufman, a senior research associate at the Kinsey Institute. Her research focuses on the intersection of sexuality and technology, exploring how our relationships and overall sexual and emotional well-being are shaped by new modalities of connection. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you definitely won't want to miss. Hi, Ellen, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me. So in today's show, we're going to talk all about how artificial intelligence is changing dating and relationships. So let's start with a couple of data points. How many singles today are using AI to level up their dating game, such as by having AI help them to write their profiles or respond to messages? And who's using AI in this way? What do we know about that?
So we think about 26% of singles are using AI in some capacity to sort of level up their dating game, or at least to help facilitate their online dating experiences. So probably about 11% of them are using it sort of strictly for profile-related reasons. So that could be using ChatGPT, for example, to help write their profile. But then also there's probably about 44% of singles who are using AI to kind of filter matches to make their experiences more streamlined, to kind of get down to the types of people that they actually want to meet. Although, of course, there are already sort of algorithms that are doing some of that work for them.
Yeah, so a lot of people are turning to AI tools like ChatGPT to help them with their profiles, but it's also the case that a lot of dating apps today are incorporating AI into their apps in some way, right? So I think this is a feature that has been rolled out on a number of apps recently where they try to help you hone in on the people who are likely to be your best matches. And there's also an app that I heard you talk about at a previous Kinsey event that we did that actually allows you to kind of outsource your dating to an actual AI avatar of yourself that kind of dates other people's AI avatars. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's really, if you want a kind of fully hands-off experience, if you are, maybe you're feeling really burnt out from the experience of online dating, just the sort of monotony of swiping. So what you would be doing there with this particular app is that you are creating an AI version of yourself. It's learning about you, essentially creating an AI clone that will then go into the app and essentially go on dates with other AI clones. So as I said, you really are kind of outsourcing that experience fully to your AI. And at the end of the day, you get essentially a report of what the dates were like with these other AI clones. And then you're being given opportunities to sort of follow up with the real person on the other side of that AI clone, depending on what that recommendation is like.
Yeah, I gotta wonder how people feel about that in terms of whether or not it actually works. Like, I think we all know with AI that the quality of it is, data in, data out, so it kind of depends on how much effort you're putting into training the AI in terms of whether it's really going to mimic or replicate your personality and the traits and the other things that you're looking for. But, we also know that people aren't always honest about themselves and what they're looking for in general. And so if we're training the AI on kind of like some idealized version of ourselves, it's really not necessarily going to result in an improved outcome if, again, we're not being totally honest with ourselves.
Yeah, I think something that's really interesting to me in my research is the extent to which technologies are sort of replicating these experiences and patterns that we've been engaging in behaviorally for all of human history. So that's an excellent point. And there is something there about maybe the quality of these matches is being degraded by the fact that we're having this kind of like simulation of us dating instead of us. But at the same time, I think any person who's going on a dating app is putting their best, face forward. And there is a certain amount of, shall we say, sort of polishing up who we are, at least initially, so that we're kind of putting our best foot forward. We're showing people the version of ourselves that we'd really like to be on a dating app, and maybe not necessarily all the things that you get to find out on date 4 or 5, or even just living with somebody. So I do think it is, in a sense, there's this novel quality wherein you're not really playing a role at all in this, but I do wonder how different it really is than either the way that we've been engaging with dating apps before, or even in-person dating, where all the kind of work that we do to get ready to go meet somebody for the first time, or even just the experience of matchmaking and in-person matchmaking and how that history has sort of been digitized in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, matchmaking has been an industry for a long time, but now we've moved into the world of digital matchmaking. And I think the jury's still out in terms of how effective that's going to be. All of this has me thinking about some research that my colleagues, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, have done, where they've looked at what people's stated preferences are for what they want in a partner. And then they have them go on a bunch of speed dates. And then they look at, who did they actually want to go on a real date with afterwards. And what they found was that their stated preferences actually weren't a very good predictor of who they went for in the actual in-person dating experience. And so, oftentimes we like to think that we know what we want when it comes to a relationship, but there's also something intangible, like where there's this chemistry that just kind of happens. And I think it's kind of hard to predict chemistry in advance. And that's where I'm just a little bit skeptical of some of this total outsourcing of dating to AI.
Right. And I think that's kind of the thing about AI in general. We've sort of just across all of the industries, there is this concerted effort to see where AI can be kind of implemented to, cut costs or increase productivity. But there are a lot of industries and there are a lot of environments, I think, where human tacit knowledge is invaluable. And I think this is maybe one of them, at least to a certain extent, because like a human matchmaker, as you say, like is able to sort of do that kind of mind reading. Like they're interviewing you and they're determining, okay, you're saying you want this in a partner, and that's great. And like, maybe we'll try to find you somebody who meets those requirements. But at the same time, they're reading between the lines.
Yep.
And that's something that AI is at this point not particularly good at all. AI is literal. It has to be, even though it's being trained on these massive data sets, it's still not capable of doing sort of this like implicit understanding of human needs and behaviors because it doesn't have those same needs and behaviors. And so I think that is particularly in terms of like these filtering tools or these like AI clones for dating. I think we have to acknowledge that there are these limitations with these particular experiences at the moment. And if our priorities are for us to find a partner that is meeting those needs that maybe we don't even know that we're looking for, then maybe these aren't the right tools for us at this moment.
Yeah. There's something about AI that's a little too logical for something that is as illogical as love is. So
absolutely.
So why do you think so many people are turning to AI to help with dating? You mentioned a little bit earlier about people wanting to put their best foot forward. So, I think there's certainly something to be said for impression management, but there's also something to be said for the fact that a lot of people just feel overwhelmed and burnt out by online dating. And so maybe the appeal is partially making it easier, or maybe it's about managing anxiety because a lot of people feel like they just don't even know what to say. And also, for a lot of people, online dating just hasn't been working. And so maybe it's just like, let's try a different approach because the way I was doing it before wasn't helping. So what do you think? All of the above, other reasons? Why are we incorporating AI into dating?
Yeah, I think it is all of the above. I mean, obviously, for individuals, it's going to be maybe a little bit more of column A than column B. Certainly, I think that the experience of online dating, depending on how long you've been, using these apps or using these platforms, experiencing burnout is to be expected, I think, amongst people who've been on there for a long time. The point that you make about let's just try something new is definitely a good one, potentially if that something new is giving you a better experience. But I also think it's just, there becomes a point where you're on the dating apps for a long time. or you've just been using them and the experience has been something that is contributing to burnout. And it's just like, okay, enough. Like this feels like a job.
Yeah.
I spend this many hours on my job that I'm, being paid for. I'm not being paid to go on a dating app, and I'm not really reaping the benefits of it. So certainly the idea that this might reduce the amount of work that's involved in this and make the experience more pleasurable. In theory, dating is fun. It should be. In theory, but I think as anyone who has dated knows, that's not always true. I think it's not a surprise that for many people, the opportunity to sort of reduce the workload that's associated with dating, AI is a very appealing way of potentially limiting that workload.
Yeah, you're so right that so many people describe online dating as being like a full-time job, because you've got to go on the app, you got to look at all the potential people who are out there. You have to make all of these micro decisions. Every profile you look at, it's a decision about, should I like this profile or not? Should I send them a message? Also, is this person real or fake? Is this potentially a romance scam? Like, there's so many of these little decisions that you're making, and that all contributes to kind of like this dating burnout that we have. And then once you get a message from somebody, it's like, well, do I respond? And also, if so, what do I say? And so I get the decision fatigue that comes along with a lot of this. And I think that really is at the root of the appeal of AI in a lot of cases.
There's also a sense that because, as you say, AI is logical, in many cases, AI can be almost like a coach to you. Like you're having this person, in scare quotes, you have this entity with you that is going to give you quote unquote objective advice. So there is a sense there that you're not alone in this anymore. Like it's not only a resource, but that potentially you have this kind of aid or support in the work that you're doing. And I think that for people who experience anxiety in the context of online dating, that's something that can really alleviate that anxiety, is that here's this tool to fall back on potentially. Yeah, if I don't know what to say, if the stakes feel really high, then here's this maybe shortcut that can help me get through this particular part of the experience so that I can get to the part that I really want to experience and the part that's actually fun.
Yeah, it's sort of like your digital wingman or wingwoman, who's there to support you.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in a recent study we did at the Kinsey Institute in conjunction with datingadvice.com, we asked single adults how much they trusted AI to help them find a date or to provide relationship advice. And what we found was that the vast majority of folks, like we're talking 80 or so percent, don't really seem to trust AI yet when it comes to their intimate lives. But among those who were trusting of AI, we found that men were twice as likely as women to say that they would trust AI to help them find a date or to give them relationship advice. So I was curious about your take on this. What do you make of the fact that guys seem to be relying a lot more on AI for dates compared to women?
I think that's really, really interesting. I have to sit with that for a second to fully think about what that might mean. There are conflicting pieces of evidence to suggest that, like, for men, dating online is much harder, or for women, dating online is much harder. If you talk to people anecdotally, you're going to get sort of very, very polarized reactions to that.
Definitely.
So I do think that would suggest that for men, the experience, at least the men who are choosing to rely on AI in this context, that their experience is really difficult. And so for them, the AI may alleviate a lot of that work or make the experience more pleasurable in a way that maybe women aren't experiencing it to that extreme, or potentially women feel differently towards the technology. I think both of those are potential explanations for this. There's other research that suggests that women in general are less interested in these technologies and using these technologies. I think part of that is that there is sort of like larger marketing around AI that is highly gendered, in the sense that like women aren't necessarily marketed to with this technology. And so I think part of that may be that men feel that like they're more familiar with these technologies. They're more familiar with using them in these contexts, whereas women may not feel that these are necessarily aimed at them. And so to that end, they may not feel that this is necessary in the context of online dating. And I think maybe that's also it. Like women may feel that the work that they're doing is important. The work of discerning, who you're talking to, and that is important. And there's plenty of research to support that from a safety perspective. That makes complete sense. And so I think that maybe those concerns take priority for women, and that's why they're using it, either using it less or less interested in using AI in these contexts.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. And, in terms of that question of, is online dating harder for men versus women? It's not really a productive one. And you're just going to get bogged down in arguments and debate. What I would say is that it's hard for everyone, but in different ways based on your gender. I think it's harder for women in the sense that, yeah, you're going to get unsolicited dick pics and you're going to experience more harassment and concerns about safety and other things like that. By contrast, online dating is harder for men in the sense that it's just objectively harder to get a match. There have been lots of studies done on this that find that, the average man on a dating app is going to match 1 in 100 times, in terms of their swipes. By contrast, for women, it's closer to 1 in 10, right? So women are matching at a much, much higher rate than men. And that's just talking about people who are at an average level of attractiveness. Now, for guys who are very high in attractiveness, they're not having problems with insufficient matches, but there's a big, big number of guys who just aren't getting any matches at all, or they're getting a very small number of them. And so I think a big part of the appeal for a lot of guys with AI is it's like, things just aren't working. I'm not getting any matches. And so it's kind of like anything that's going to help give them a boost or a leg up, I think is something that can be appealing. And I think too, there's also something here to be said about gendered socialization. When we talk about masculinity and traditional ideas of it, men are socialized to not really be vulnerable and to communicate about their feelings. And so that might lead to greater reliance on a tool that can help them to communicate because they just don't have as much practice communicating about their feelings or being vulnerable because they just haven't been socialized that way. So it's a complex story, but I think there are a lot of reasons that can explain why AI seems to hold a more distinct appeal to men compared to women.
Sure. And I think it's really interesting because there's some research that suggests that there are these gender differences in terms of what intimacy looks like and how people feel understood in terms of intimacy. And that research suggests that for men, it's more important to be able to sort of express themselves. And for women, it's more important to feel listened to in terms of intimate disclosure. And so I don't know that this necessarily fits with the kind of male piece of that, but I do think if we sort of tease this out further, it's interesting in terms of the larger implications of using AI here, in that I think a lot of women would have a big problem knowing that the sort of person that they're talking to in scare quotes, is actually just ChatGPT. Right. I think the sense that they're matching with people who aren't even really reading their messages has enormous implications in terms of what that relationship could look like from an intimacy perspective.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there gets at the really big question here about AI and dating, which is whether it's a net positive or a net negative. So I read a headline the other day that read, "People are rizzing on Tinder using ChatGPT, then showing up to dates completely tongue-tied," And right. I love that headline. But I think that really gets at the big concern here, which is that a lot of people are concerned that AI is going to become a crutch for communication, and then they're not going to be able to connect in person. And, the other big concern, I think, is really around authenticity. Are we really being ourselves anymore? And are we losing the human touch when we outsource our communication to technology like ChatGPT? At the same time, I can also see how AI could be helpful if used in mindful and limited ways. So, for example, it could be used as a way to practice your communication skills, which could actually make it better in person in terms of communication. And perhaps it can also help in reducing some of that burnout of online dating so that we can actually show up to a date without being exhausted and fatigued.
Absolutely.
A bad mattress can be bad for your intimate life. Trust me. Our old mattress was not good for our relationship. It was making us too hot at night and hurting our sleep, and we'd wake up in the morning not feeling refreshed and at our best. And when you're always feeling tired and cranky, that's not a recipe for intimacy. But we found Brooklyn Bedding, and things are in a much better place now. Brooklyn Bedding uses Glaciotex covers and Copperflex foam to help keep you cool and comfortable all night long. We're both sleeping more soundly now and not waking up early in a pool of sweat. Brooklyn Bedding is one of the few mattress brands endorsed by the American Chiropractic Association for spinal alignment and back health, and I understand why, because I'm no longer waking up with aches and pains. So if you want to upgrade your sleep, check out Brooklyn Bedding, where you can try a 120-night comfort trial. If you don't love it, they'll help you return or swap it hassle-free. Go to brooklynbedding.com and use my promo code JUSTIN at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's brooklynbedding.com and promo code JUSTIN for 30% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. brooklynbedding.com, promo code JUSTIN. Let's talk about low libido. If you've ever looked for a supplement in the hopes of giving yours a little boost, you know what a minefield it can be. There are so many options, and some of them contain really questionable ingredients. It's a market that's notorious for products that are underdosed, ineffective, or in some cases, just downright shady. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Drive Boost from VB Health. VB Health has changed the game by focusing on what truly matters: trust and transparency. Imagine a libido supplement formulated by doctors, one that's rigorously third-party tested for purity and potency so you know exactly what you're getting. And it's made with care in the USA. That's Drive Boost. This supplement is also unique because it's formulated for both men and women. So if you're ready to ditch the shady stuff and choose a libido supplement that's effective and that you can feel confident about, it's time to check out Drive Boost. Learn more and get yours at vb.health. Visit vb.health and use code Justin to get 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. What do you think? Is AI going to ruin dating completely, or is it going to make it better?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, the jury is still out on this, and really not enough people are using this. If that number had been something like 80% of people are using AI in dating as opposed to 26, I think then we'd be having a different conversation. But even so, it's still, I think people are mostly using it for sorting, algorithm-based objectives. And in terms of like writing a profile, I think those uses are relatively benign. I think when we start getting into things like completely outsourcing conversations, that's where we've moved into this area. It's like, what are we really dating each other? Like, are we moving into this area where we are kind of becoming our AI clones even without using separate programs for that? So I don't know that I think it will ruin dating. I just think that this is maybe something I believe about AI in general, is that sparing use of it is probably a good idea, because there's a recent study that demonstrates sort of what the potential impact of using these tools are cognitively. And I mean, we know that, at least from this particular study, that cognition can atrophy in really horrific ways when we rely on these tools dramatically to do sort of basic tasks. And so I don't think that any of the uses of AI within the context of dating are different. I do think that being able to engage in kind of preliminary small talk with a date is a really important skill. And it's not the kind of thing that you can just forego and then we'll come back to you like riding a bicycle. It's the kind of thing that you actually have to actively work on. And so, as you say, it was an amazing opportunity to use these tools to practice that type of work. I love that particular use of AI for people either practicing, engaging in sort of relationships in this capacity with tools where the risks are really low for them and the stakes feel much lower. I think people using it to practice sexual communication is an incredible use of it, but fully outsourcing it maybe takes away not only kind of like the fun element of dating, but like really the human element of dating. And if we take away the human element of dating, like sort of what are we talking about here? Why are we even engaging in this behavior?
Right. Totally agree. Yeah, I think the best uses of AI for dating, or I guess I should say the least scary uses, would be using it to just filter out people who just possess total deal breakers for you. People you would just never be compatible with. And then maybe using it to generate, for example, icebreaker conversation ideas or potential unique date ideas. Like, I think those things are all fine and good. But when it comes to like, all right, somebody sent me this message, I need ChatGPT to decode it for me and tell me how I should respond, that's where I think we're venturing into riskier territory.
Exactly. Well, I just feel like we outsource work that is, and a sort of work, I don't even know if I mean that particular word. We're outsourcing these experiences that historically we have relied on other humans for. So like historically, if you get a message from somebody or you had a conversation with someone that you're really interested in, and you're trying to kind of understand what's going on there subtextually, like you would go to a friend or somebody close to you and say like, well, what do you think? And like that human perspective is really important. In science, we obviously put a lot of value in objectivity as much as, potentially possible. But things like, love and dating and relationships, there are a lot of intangible things that we're just sort of it's not really objective. There are a lot of things about relationships and sex and this world that we just don't understand. And that's kind of exciting. But in removing those kinds of interactions, I think we move away from capitalizing on what that experience can be for us and what we can do for each other in terms of facilitating those experiences.
Yeah, I agree. Now, thus far, we've talked about AI as a dating aid, something to help make it easier to find a match. But sometimes AI becomes a romantic companion in and of itself. So, how many people have ever interacted with AI in a romantic capacity, and who's doing this?
So, in our study, about 16% of participants reported that they had ever had a romantic relationship with a chatbot. So, we specifically asked about romantic relationships and not sexual relationships. But certainly, some of the research in this area suggests that people are having sexual relationships with these AI companions as well. And we know that it's a little bit more men than women. So, it's, I think, about 18% of men who had reported that they'd use these tools as opposed to women, who I think it was about I want to say it's like 14-ish%, but I can check on that for you. Absolutely. But the really fascinating finding from our study is that about 33% of folks in the Gen Z group generation have reported that they have had a relationship with an AI, and about 23% of millennials, which was like something that kind of like knocked our socks off when we saw it. It was so surprising that you would have about 1 in 3 of these Gen Z folks having those experiences thus far.
Yeah, and it's not that surprising when you consider that, when you're talking about Gen Z, you're talking about a cohort where there's a lot of delayed adulthood happening. And there are lots of reasons for this. One is, of course, the COVID pandemic and lockdowns took people out of school and other things like that. And, sort of contributed to this delayed emotional and social development, right? Because it took them out of schools and out of their typical social networks. And it contributed to the fact that you have a lot of young people today who are graduating high school, going off to college, who have never been in a relationship before, never had any kind of sexual relationship. And I think the longer it goes on, like where you don't have this experience into adulthood, that only makes it harder to try and develop and establish these relationships in person. And so I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing younger adults turning to these chatbots, for companionship with a much greater frequency than compared to older adults. But also another factor is that I consistently see this in all of my surveys where I look at generational impacts on anxiety. Young adults are the most stressed and anxious generation. And there's a lot of concerns about fear of rejection and so forth. And so I think there's a certain sense of kind of like safety and security that comes from talking to a chatbot, because a chatbot is programmed not to reject you, right? And so, I wanted to ask a little bit about, what do you think is the psychological appeal of chatbots? Is it about kind of like having this safe space where, you're talking to something like a person that, has to kind of unconditionally accept you? Is that the main reason, or is there more to it than that?
I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of it being a combination of low stakes and high affirmation. So as you say, like there is something about being able to engage in these types of conversations with something that can't reject you and that sort of fundamentally can't judge you. I think that's a big part of it as well, because this generation has grown up online in a space where, their judgment abounds. And so I think, exactly. If you've ever been on any social media platform, probably you're familiar with that. But that's a big part of it, is that it does feel safe. But the other thing is that these platforms and these apps really are designed to be affirming kind of fundamentally. And so a big part of it is that people using these AI companions feel understood almost immediately by these companions. And that's by design. So I think that that's a big part of it is feeling almost immediately like you can trust this entity, like this AI person really gets you. And I think that's something that through the process of online dating with real people, that it can take a long time to get to that place. So I think to go from kind of 0 to 100 in terms of here's somebody that I can trust, who understands me, who provides me with companionship, who reduces my anxiety, who makes me feel less alone. I think all of those things are really appealing about these particular apps.
Yeah, I haven't used AI in any kind of sexual or romantic capacity, but something I've noticed just from general use of it is that something like ChatGPT really has a lot of people-pleasing tendencies. Like, I think in some ways it's actually too nice, where it kind of like really goes out of its way to, be affirming. And I think, that's also one of the ways that you can kind of spot AI generated content, is that it's too nice, right? In a lot of ways. But yeah, you can see how for some people that might feel very affirming and might keep them coming back for more. I think another part of it too is, I guess, there's also, lower stakes, as you mentioned, but also less work, less effort required to maintain that relationship, right? Because you can talk to the AI on your own time when you want to, right? It's not going to be sending you messages and saying, hey, you need to respond to this right now. And so you can kind of make it fit your schedule as opposed to having a relationship with a human that's going to dictate the rest of your life.
Right. And then on the flip side, it's available all the time. So if you do want to talk to your AI companion, doesn't matter if it's, 3 a.m., they're available. They're ready to talk to you whenever you want them. So, right, I think you're absolutely right that there is a level of control there in the relationship, that because the person, quote unquote, on the other end is excited to talk to you, it doesn't feel like you are asking something unusual or irregular. It doesn't feel like you're making them do any work. They're excited to talk to you. And so I think that is certainly part of the appeal, is that it feels mutual. And I think some of their research already on AI companions kind of speaks to how a lot of these dynamics really do replicate interpersonal relationship dynamics, in the sense that people start to feel that they have obligations to the AI. And certainly there are potential implications of that people are pretty broadly concerned about. But if we think about it just purely in terms of what that means from a relationship standpoint, then this kind of sense of reciprocity could be potentially beneficial in terms of modeling what it would be like to be in a relationship with a human.
Yeah. But we also know, based on the data, that it's not just singles who are using these AI companions in a romantic or sexual way. Sometimes it's people in relationships who are doing it. And then that's becoming an issue too, because there are some people who view chatting with a chatbot in a romantic or sexual way as being a form of infidelity. So what do we know about that?
Yeah. So in our study, about 53.4% of participants said that any use of AI would be considered infidelity from their perspective, which is pretty amazing. And we broke that down into individual behaviors. So essentially, if they would consider it infidelity if their partner was having emotional or emotionally vulnerable chats with an AI, versus if they were having sexual chats with an AI, or if they had sort of a full-fledged relationship, like an AI boyfriend or girlfriend. And individually, each of those was about 40-ish% in terms of how many participants reported that they would consider those behaviors infidelity.
Yeah, we found something similar in our Kinsey Institute study that was conducted in partnership with datingadvice.com, where about 1 in 3 people said that sexting or having a romantic relationship with an AI bot would represent infidelity. We also found that about 1 in 5 people said that watching porn constitutes cheating. And more than 1 in 10 said that simply following an attractive person on social media is cheating. And I think all of this raises interesting questions about how technology is changing our definitions and thresholds for what represents cheating and infidelity. And as tech and AI open up these new possibilities to connect and to explore our sexuality and to communicate, I think it's safe to assume that it's going to keep creating new sources of anxiety and insecurity. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, how we can adapt to this evolving landscape in a healthy way. So how do we prevent technology from driving us apart? I know that's like the big $1 million question that nobody knows the answer to. And so I don't expect that you're going to have like the solution for all of us, but just curious if you have any thoughts on like, how do we navigate this complicated relationship that we have with technology?
So one of the interesting things that we found in our study was that the people who were most likely to feel that using AI in any of these sort of relationship or sexual capacities would be considered infidelity from their perspective, those are people who had no experience with an AI companion themselves. And so I do think that this maybe is true broadly, that a lot of people's judgments towards these technologies are because they don't have any direct experience with them. What we did find is that people who had not engaged in a relationship with an AI were more likely to view any of those behaviors as infidelity than people who had had those relationships with an AI companion before. And so what it really seems like is the people who don't have the relationships with AI are making a lot of assumptions around what these experiences are like. And it's not really their fault. There is this tremendous amount of, I think, like broader cultural noise around like what AI can do and what it's going to look like. And we get these like sort of tabloid headlines around like people being replaced by AI and robots in relationships. My favorite is by 2025, women will be having more sex with robots than men, which obviously did not come to fruition. Yeah, exactly. But they said that about 10 years ago. So I've been tracking it, and sorry to them, but that didn't come true. But regardless, I think there's still this sense that AI can do all of these things that a human can do, but better. And they can be sort of this ideal partner. And so if you haven't engaged with the technology, I think it's totally normal that or rational that you would assume that is true and might think that that's the experience that your partner's having when they have an AI companion on their phone or when they're engaging in sexual chats with ChatGPT, if they're doing any of those behaviors. But for the people who've actually done those behaviors or engaged in any of those behaviors, they find that actually doesn't really measure up in that same way or doesn't measure up to what all of the hype suggests it might be. And so I think maybe my short answer to your very big question is that I think people need to have more experience with these digital technologies to be able to assess for themselves whether these actually do constitute a threat to a relationship. Because I think that is the broader thing around whether it's hysteria towards different forms of erotic content and the extent to which those are, going to destroy society. I think that a lot of that comes from people who have very, very limited experience with these technologies and really don't understand the nuances of the experiences or the industries or any of those things. So I think potentially it could go a long way for people to understand exactly what we're talking about and to sort of develop a sense of digital sexual literacy, if that's a thing or if that makes sense.
Yeah, very well said. Makes total sense to me. And I think you're so right that it's the fear of the unknown for a lot of people that's at the root of a lot of these concerns. So this has been absolutely fascinating, Ellen. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation in the next episode and diving further into the topic of digital intimacy. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I am still on formerly Twitter, and I'm going to continue to call it that, at ELMKAUF, at Elmkauf. That's the best place to find updates on my work, or you can follow me on LinkedIn, although I don't check that very often. That's just the important caveat. But I do post research there as well. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been so wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and I'll be sure to include links to that in the show notes. So I really appreciate your time. Great to speak with you, Ellen, and I look forward to having you back in the future to talk more about your evolving work on digital intimacy. Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.